Well, good afternoon, South Carolina. Hello from Washington, D.C. I am Jason Gross, Executive Director of the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition. It is good to join together with all of you today. Typically, this is the season when I'm traveling all over the country and getting to see you in person. I really miss that personal interaction, but glad we can connect in this way. Let me start off by saying my deepest thoughts and prayers are with those who are suffering right now in this crisis, and I sincerely hope that you and your families who are traveling or who are joining us today are safe and healthy. I'm very pleased to be joined by nearly 100 USGLC members from South Carolina for this important discussion on America's role in the world in the midst of COVID-19 and how and why leading globally matters locally, living proof of it right now. This is an important conversation, and we're honored to have Congressman Joe Wilson with us today. We're going to see him in a moment when I formally introduce him, and we'll welcome him to the Zoom. Some quick logistics before we start off. You're all on mute right now, but we do want to hear from you later. And when I open up the Q&A section with the Congressman, there are a couple of ways to ask questions. On your computers on the Zoom function, you can check out the raise hand function, and you can signify your interest in asking questions that way by hitting raise hand, and we'll get to you. If you're joining us just by phone today, you can dial *9 on your phone, and we'll get to you. And one more way is you prefer to write out your question. There's a Q&A box, and you can use that to type your questions, and we'll get to those as well. Let me start off a little bit about USGLC. This year, USGLC is proud to celebrate 25 years of building a better, safer world. And believe me when I tell you that we had no idea our 25th year would be anything like this. I see we have some new people joining us here today. Welcome to all of you new folks. I think you're all realizing that what happens overseas affects us here at home. So I want to tell you a little bit about who we are. USGLC is a big tent coalition. We're over 500 American businesses and humanitarian organizations alongside business, faith, military, community leaders from all 50 states who come together around the importance of our civilian tools of national power, development and diplomacy alongside defense. We are Democrats, Republicans, independents. Our network spans from coast to coast and throughout the country. Our bipartisan advisory councils made up some of our nation's leading national security and foreign policy minds, and includes every living former Secretary of State from Henry Kissinger to John Kerry. We're proud of the growing voice of the military in our coalition, who understand better than most the critical role international development and diplomacy play in our national security toolkit. Our National Security Advisory Council is co-chaired by General Tony Zinni and Admiral James Stavridis, and is comprised of over 200 former retired flag officers. Our Veterans for Smart Power is made up of over 30,000 veterans from across the country who are committed to strengthening our non-military tools. And what brings all these different voices together is that we live in an interconnected world, is that firm belief that we live in that interconnected world, and that America needs to be engaged globally to advance our interests here at home. And to do that, we need all of our tools, including development, diplomacy, and democracy. When we share that story, we like to tell about that tiny 1% of the federal budget called the International Affairs budget that is one of the most cost-effective and powerful investments America makes. It's sometimes called the foreign aid budget, but it's so much more than that. It funds our diplomats and embassies around the world, support for our key allies. It funds efforts to tackle global health threats, humanitarian disasters, impacts of climate change, and the root causes of terrorism. It includes efforts to combat corruption, promote the rule of law, advance democracy and universal rights and freedoms. It includes programs that open up new markets for American goods and services to export, public-private partnerships that are providing a hand up, not a handout, to millions around the globe. It's effective, it's accountable, it's transparent, and it delivers for the American people. We host forums like this with people all over the country, and now, of course, they're all virtual, but we really see that around the US, Americans still want to engage on these issues. COVID-19 has really underscored the importance of this fight, and we are so fortunate to be joined by an expert in Congress, to help us have this discussion. So pleased to introduce our special guest, who you all know well, Congressman Joe Wilson. Good afternoon, Congressman. We know you are hard at work to address the challenges of the pandemic over the past few months and keep South Carolinians safe. Congressman Wilson serves on both the House Foreign Affairs Committee and the House Armed Services Committee and is a leading voice when it comes to advancing America's global leadership and protecting our national security. From his 30 years of service in the Army to his work in Congress and travel overseas, he knows firsthand why we need to invest in all of our tools of national power. Development and diplomacy alongside defense for a true 3D national security strategy to keep America safe, secure, and prosperous. Congressman, thank you so much for joining us today. First of all, most importantly, let me ask you, how are you and your family doing?
Well, Jason, thank you for the introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor to be with you. And I'm really grateful that our family is doing well. But like so many families, I have a mother-in-law who's at a nursing home. And so the stress and sadness of where we cannot visit, right. I fully understand. And the incredible stresses that we have with my grandchildren, levels of school. And so I'm just so hopeful and so proud of Governor Henry McMaster's leadership, President Donald Trump's leadership to address the issues. But again, I'm grateful to be with you, Jason, and the very warm introduction. And I'm also very appreciative for the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition for organizing this call. And first, I'd like to, again, provide my best wishes and prayers for the continued health and safety of everyone and the families across South Carolina. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with the prominent members of the South Carolina business community, the foreign policy, military communities, about the ongoing importance of American leadership and engagement in the world, which I feel in the current environment we're in has never been more important, that a democratic voice be in place to promote every effort of facing the coronavirus and additionally for recovery. I'm grateful for the work that I have with my colleagues on the Foreign Affairs Committee, the Armed Services Committee, important country caucuses that I have the opportunity to co-chair, as well as the Commission on Security and Cooperation in Europe, the Helsinki Commission that I have the opportunity to be the co-chair. Additionally, I want to support the initiatives that mutually benefit our foreign allies and persons around the world and American families. When America lends a hand, the goal is our partners gain self-sufficiency and needed tools for success. And this is bipartisan. I'm very grateful, particularly on the Armed Services Committee. I have the opportunity to work very closely with people like Joe Courtney, who we work together to promote a strong national defense. And then particularly on the it's amazing, on the Foreign Affairs Committee, I'm the lead Republican on the Middle East subcommittee with Chairman Ted Deutsch. And this is a great example of working together. And it really follows working with Congressman Elliot Engel, who's the chairman of the committee. Elliot and I also have a distinction. We're the only two members of Congress who've actually been to Pyongyang. Huh. And so we were on a delegation back in 2003. And it was eye-opening then. It's even sadly more eye-opening today. But we can work together. And I love to point out a mutual friend of all of ours, and working with Chairman Elsie Hastings on the Helsinki Commission, is Sheila Jackson Lee. She points out good news has no feet, bad news has wings. And so I want to assure people who are here today that on so many issues, particularly on national defense and on foreign affairs, we do work together in a very positive manner. Additionally, the majority of U.S. assistance comes through the international affairs budget referred to as Function 150. While there are important, sad misconceptions about the spending on foreign aid, we know the reality is it's less than 1% of the annual budget directed toward development priorities abroad. The return on that investment is evident when you consider America's fastest growing markets are developing countries, which I have worked with just in the past couple of months, from Morocco to South Korea to Poland to Israel. The ongoing pandemic is a reminder of how critical American leadership is around the globe to our national security here at home. This is especially true with regard to the global health. China sadly has proven that its assertions of global health issues are not for the benefit of the global community. Rather, it seeks to consolidate influence and exploit messaging to an authoritarian conclusion. It's critical that we have global organizations like the World Health Organization and the United Nations to operate with transparency and not beholden to the interests of bad actors. Through our actions, we must continue sending a message of support to our allies and budding democracies around the world for the benefit of them as well as ourselves very much. I look forward to continuing this meaningful discussion with you. And even as we begin, I want to thank the South Carolina Global Leadership Coalition for the handout which you have provided to me on international trade. We can never not be reminded how important this is, and it changes virtually every day. And so we should be so grateful, and I want to thank you for providing this and hope that we can get this widely distributed to the citizens of South Carolina.
Thank you for kicking us off this conversation today, Congressman, with those kind words and thoughts, and really gives us a lot to think about and I think to discuss further with your constituents coming up. Let me kind of frame the discussion to talk about what we want to talk about today too. We're going to focus some on COVID-19 and America's role in the global response, and discuss why it matters to our interests and values that we address this pandemic threat both at home and abroad. And then we're going to open it up to some audience questions for the many who've joined us today. Congressman, let me start our conversation with a quick video clip and get your reaction to it right afterwards.
Today, the greatest risk of global catastrophe doesn't look like this. Instead, it looks like this. If anything kills over 10 million people in the next few decades, it's most likely to be a highly infectious virus rather than a war. Not missiles, but microbes. Now, part of the reason for this is that we have invested a huge amount in nuclear deterrence, but we've actually invested very little in a system to stop an epidemic. We're not ready for the next epidemic.
Congressman, that was Bill Gates 5 years ago warning us we were not totally ready, and without a doubt, the world is still not ready today. 70% of the world remains unprepared to respond to a pandemic. 10 countries in Africa have no ventilators right now. Now, you're no stranger to these issues. You serve on the Foreign Affairs Committee, as we talked about, that great bipartisan tradition that you began your remarks with, so important. You're a co-sponsor of the Global Health Security Act to improve the U.S. government's strategic coordination on these issues. So as we certainly address the urgent domestic challenges of this crisis, why is it also in our interest to promote global health security, helping other countries prevent, respond to infectious disease threats?
Well, Bill Gates was so prescient. And in fact, I'm really grateful that last year, working with Chairman Ted Deutsch, that we proposed legislation that passed the House overwhelmingly in regard to addressing the issue of a coronavirus. And it was included in legislation to promote better cooperation with the State of Israel, which has been so important to us as we address the coronavirus. And additionally, I worked with the Chairman Elsie Hastings, and last year we sent a letter to again promote with Secretary Azar the efforts to be proactive. But and so over and over, there have been efforts and there have been steps. And then, in fact, on my website, people can go to joewilson.house.gov. But I, on March the 14th, had a 1-minute speech where I went through where the Trump administration had actually increased funding for different health agencies and research agencies to get to try to anticipate. But again, what a remarkable insight of Bill Gates, and I commend him. And it's just so unfortunate that there wasn't a better reception and actions taken based on what he proposed.
But that's part of our ongoing response right now, and looking towards the rest of the world now as the virus threatens to spread too. It's doing that response around the world right now, because we know those countries have really challenges in their global health infrastructure to be able to respond to it.
Well, even advanced countries, it's just startling to see the level of the number of cases in the UK.
Sure.
To see, and of course in the EU itself, Italy, over and over again, and now see a large number of increases in France. Mm-hmm. And then something, Jason, that concerns me is that I'm not sure we're getting as much information as we should from countries around the world. I was startled just in the last 48 hours to see reports from Mumbai, India. I was there last year for the 70th anniversary of the independence of India with Prime Minister Modi. And what a modern, beautiful city that is, but that it's on lockdown. So is New Delhi. And so all around the world, but it's not getting the coverage that I feel like it should. And then to see that Japan now has extended its lockdown. So over and over again, we see, and then, hey, and it's utterly catastrophic as we see now in Russia. And of course, this is not being actually reported, but with the drop of oil prices and with the level of healthcare insecurity in Russia itself, it over and over again, you see a potential for instability, you see a potential for extraordinary distress and harm and death around the world.
You give great examples there also of the importance of diplomacy. So it's not only development and our assistance to the developing world is important, but our diplomacy, our sharing of intelligence and understanding with our allies is going to be so critical to defeat this pandemic, again, at home and abroad. I want to turn to the audience who joined us today right now. And I think, as you know well, and our leaders in South Carolina know well, we have been making the case at USGLC that as long as the deadly virus is anywhere, Americans can't be safe, given how quickly it could spread and rebound back here, even as we make progress in defeating it here. We wanted to understand American voters' attitudes about America's role in the world in fighting COVID-19. So we conducted a poll, nationwide poll. And you see up on your screen right now, we have the webinar poll function. And I'm asking our audience members a question about the results of the poll. And you can see it up there. Our first question today is, for this national survey, what percentage of American voters think that as long as coronavirus is spreading anywhere in the world, that we won't be safe from new outbreaks here in the US? You have four choices on what percentage of American voters. Was it 15% of American voters who believe that if it's spreading anywhere, we won't be safe? 35%, 50%, or 77% of American voters? Make your choice right now, and then we'll see. Okay. For those of you who answered at the bottom, the largest percentage, that is correct. 77% of American voters strongly know that diseases know no borders. We can't ignore the rest of the world, and the results of our poll were overwhelming across the political spectrum. And you can see that up on your screen there of the understanding of the spreading anywhere. 77% recognize that among the American people, and something that everyone on this call, most everyone on this call, got as well. So to share some additional thoughts on the importance of a U.S. leading abroad, I want to welcome Edie Rhode-Willard. She's the first vice chair of the South Carolina Republican Party, a member of USGLC's South Carolina Advisory Committee, to follow on from that poll of the American people. Edie, let's hear from your thoughts on today's discussion. Welcome.
Well, thank you so much. This is my first virtual town hall or Zoom meeting to participate in.
So glad to have you.
Thank you so much. And I first just want to say thank you so much, Congressman, for all of your understanding and your work internationally, the fact that you understand how important this is. I'm always so grateful as part of the advisory committee to go to your office and talk to you and your staff, because you enlighten us about the importance of the significance, the influence, or basically the power of U.S. goodwill to other developing nations. And that's just so important. We appreciate that so much. And I just want to stress again, that it's, and basically to say how grateful I am that 77% of the voters do understand the importance that if we don't help contain this in other parts of the world, it's coming right back here. And of course, you know, the murder hornet that's been in the local news lately is of course, you know, another example of that. You know, I'll never forget one of the points that we learn is, you know, 11 of our 15 trading partners today were originally part of the Marshall Plan, you know, a plan where after World War II, we gave tremendous aid to other countries to help rebuild their economies. Most people don't realize that 50% of our exports are exports. People who are buying our goods and services across the world are in developing, 50% are purchased by developing countries today. So if their economies and their health goes south, then so does our economy. I feel like right now we are concentrating so much on reopening our local economies, our local restaurants, our local shops, but we need to know that so much of our jobs also depend on the health and opening up of economies in the developing world as well. I feel like one thing we have to remember that when we retreat from the world, China and Russia are going to step in to fill that void, and they are not filling the void with democracy. So
Edie,
thank you for being here.
Edie, thank you for that question. I said to you, Congressman, that poll shows overwhelming support around the country, in South Carolina, for being proactive right now and in tackling this virus around the world. Edie talked about our economic sensitivities as well. I mean, if we're going to start our economic recovery, this is going to be, we're going to need to get back to exporting around the world, Port of Charleston and everything to get out to the rest of the world. What more do you see for the America to be leading right now on, while we're dealing with at home, to also be tackling this abroad, this COVID-19 pandemic?
Well, and I appreciate Edie's historical perspective.
Yeah.
She understands and appreciates history by pointing out the Marshall Plan, what an incredible success that was. And then I've had the opportunity to live others. And that is, I've been to Colombia. I've seen the success of Plan Colombia, a country of 40 million people, a great ally of the United States. And because of Plan Colombia, the FARC terrorists have been largely subdued. And it's a very modern country with great opportunity for the people of Colombia. I've been to Afghanistan to see the clasped hands of the USAID. Mark Green, the director, what an incredible job they've done. There'll be signs in very rural parts of the remote parts of the country indicating that a school was built by USAID. And the sign is rusty. If people didn't want it, they would tear it down. But it has an impact. And then on my visits to Korea, you have to imagine that in 1960, the per capita income in Korea was like $100. Today, it's nearly $40,000. And what was an ash after the Korean War now has been replaced by a forest of 30 and 40-story condominiums as far as you can see. And so the opportunities that, again, working with aid and how beneficial it is to our countries. And then again, Jason, this is so important. With the coronavirus, this could be extraordinary instability around the world. Countries that were just beginning their development capabilities, sadly, are going to be set back. And then bad actors, and sadly, I was very much counting on the Russian Federation to be a positive country. It's not. They may want to divert attention. And then the People's Republic of China, again, sadly, they have been complicit in concealing information about the way this virus could be transferred person to person. And then we've already seen Iran to try to divert attention from the extraordinary incapacity they have. They focus so much on promoting terrorism, not on health, that just in the past couple of weeks, they have launched missile attacks against our embassy through proxies in Baghdad and Kirkuk, additionally threatening our ships. And so there's clearly a direct relationship that needs to be addressed as we work with our allies around the world to promote economic development. And then even an advanced country where my second son serves in the Navy in Italy, Naples, their economy has really crashed. And so over and over again, we need to be available so that not just for the benefit of the people in those countries, but it's so beneficial to us to maintain a level of stability that only 60 days ago we had.
Yes. I mean, Congressman, you not only know the positive effects of what effective U.S. foreign assistance and diplomacy can do around the world. You've lived it. I mean, you've seen these examples. Our NATO allies after the Marshall Plan, Plan Colombia for what's transformed that society to the potential. South Korea. I mean, we like to tell that example there of today. We receive more. We export more to South Korea in 1 year of U.S. The value of U.S. exports to South Korea in 1 year is more than the entire amount of assistance we gave to South Korea after the war. So those pennies we invested back then come back to dollars right now. And as you said, if it's effective and we can do it right, you can see this importance that we're going to have to do right now with the rest of the world, because they're going to be hit hard by this coronavirus, just as it's hit us hard too. And it's working with them and being to address that on their road to recovery, just like Europe devastated after World War II, or Colombia devastated after their civil war. It's working with our allies together to help these countries recover is going to have to be part of the global economy too, or we're not going to get anywhere after this.
And I've seen it too, Jason. I've had the opportunity to work with Ambassador Kim of Korea, the Republic of Korea. They have provided PPE to the United States. It's so heartwarming to see this. And then I've had the opportunity to work with the Republic of Turkey. They have provided PPE and to our country, working with the ambassador in Washington around the world. There have been positive stories, and it's somewhat sad that because it's good news, it doesn't get coverage.
It's true. And you talked a lot about national security. Let's talk about that also. I mean, Plan
Yes.
Colombia, your experience on House Armed Services. We at USGLC, we talk about if we don't get it right, we have to get it started with the national security angle. And our top general and admiral, General Zinni, Admiral Stavridis, said in a statement just a month ago that no matter how successful we are in fighting the threat of COVID-19 pandemic at home, we will never stop it unless we are also fighting it around the world. So let me turn back to our audience again, who nailed that first question so well. I'll give you another one right now about where the stakes are on national security. This is according to the International Rescue Committee, a leading NGO, up to how many people in the world's 34 most conflict-affected and fragile states are at risk of contracting COVID-19. So you have three choices here for the number of people in the 34 most conflict-affected fragile states: 100 million overall, 500 million, or 1 billion. Please make your selection now. We'll see the results in a second. Here it comes. Yeah. That answer at the bottom is the right one. It's a staggering and unprecedented crisis right now that threatens the developing world. Over 1 billion that could be at risk, destabilizing many fragile regions, and the overwhelming majority of you got that. I want to go more into this national security dimension of COVID-19 and welcome to our discussion now Major General Jeff Jacobs, who knows firsthand the importance of development, diplomacy, and defense working together to tackle today's alarming challenges. General Jacobs, thanks for joining us, and please love to hear your remarks about our conversation today.
Great, thanks very much. Can you hear me?
Loud and
Yes.
clear, sir.
Okay, great. I'd like to emphasize the points that the Congressman and Edie made and say that the pandemic is very much a national security issue. National security is boiled down to its essence is the exercise of national power in furtherance of national interests. And the military teaches that there are 4 elements of national power: diplomatic, informational, military, and economic. And if we don't adequately resource the other 3 elements of national power, I see 2 major risks. One, we risk becoming less powerful as a nation. And 2, the only instrument of national power we have available to us is the military element of national power. And as the Congressman very eloquently pointed out, instability is a threat to our national interests. It's explicitly recognized as such in the President's own national security strategy. Instability often leads to violence within a country or within a region, and is always in some measure caused by socioeconomic issues, of which a pandemic is certainly one. So addressing those socioeconomic conditions is a national security issue, and we've got to do that through diplomacy and development, or I go back to the 2 risks. We risk becoming less powerful, or we have to use the military element of power. The pandemic is also recognized as a national security issue explicitly in the President's national security strategy, primarily for its effect on our own citizens. But I think it's very much a socioeconomic issue that can affect stability in regions and nations. So from a national security perspective, I think we have to be heavily involved in the entirety of the community of nations in the fight against this disease globally, to include exercising leadership among our allies and within international organizations. And diplomacy and development is how we do it. And whenever I talk about diplomacy and development from a military perspective, I go back to that ubiquitous quote from General Mattis's testimony before Congress when he was the commander of Central Command. When he told Congress, if we don't adequately fund the diplomacy and development budget, you better buy me more ammunition.
That's right. Thank you, General. I mean, queued it up for you, Congressman, right there. I mean, such telling remarks from him. You know, fragility abroad, these fragile states, they get hit with COVID-19, and these can have repercussions for our long-term security as well. U.S. military has warned us that spread of COVID-19 destabilizing further in the region around Syria, potentially resurgence of ISIS in Syria if things go pear-shaped there. And just, hey, good to see you, sir. Thanks for joining us. So Congressman, drawing on your experience in the Army, on the Armed Services, Foreign Affairs Committees, how can diseases like viruses like COVID-19 impact challenges we have like terrorism, fragility, and how do strategic investments to try and address those, try and build more stability and avoid those fragile states and turning into failed states and ultimately threatening us back here at home?
And Jason, you're right. First of all, it's an honor to be with General Jeffrey. This is great, and I wish him well. And indeed, thank goodness we have a Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, working very closely with the United States Agency of International Development Administrator Mark Green. Hey, I served in Congress with both of them. I know how capable they are. And so I think it's going to be country by country as we monitor. And Jason, you really pointed out, there are states that appear to be successful, but due to this incredible pandemic, will become failed states. All the more reason that we've got to be ever vigilant. And I'm very confident with the diplomatic corps we have, the State Department, with the USAID personnel, that working with our military officials around the world, the Department of Defense, will identify where there's instability, where their failed states are slipping away, so that we can be there to prop them up so that they can resume. Hey, so many countries were doing so well until 60 days ago. I was just in Krakow, Poland, and for the past 25 years, they have had 25 years of uninterrupted economic growth, possibly the only country in Europe, maybe the only country in the world that had this. But now they too are frozen. And so over and over again, we see examples that we could not anticipate, but thank goodness for generals that we have to be able to give us the intelligence on what we can do to help these countries resume the progress that has been made.
So true. Let's turn to economics. Edie started off of this discussion before, but we know South Carolina has strong global ties. Port of Charleston, one of the nation's top ports. Many of you joining us today are involved in exports or work in businesses who touch the global economy. But COVID-19 has upended business as usual in this country and the global economy as well. Another question for the audience today, another poll question of how much do experts now predict that global trade will be reduced by COVID-19 this year alone? What's the percentage that global trade will be reduced this year by COVID-19? Your choices are 33%, 10%, 25%. Please put your answers in now, and we'll get the sad answer to this question in a moment. Yeah, this audience is getting it right every time. 33% right now is the expected, at least, the amount of global trade reduced this year alone by this effect. This is a serious impact on our economy. How do you see that connection? You traveled so much, Congressman, about that, about how economies are interconnected right now. South Carolina doesn't export to Georgia and to California and Texas. I mean, it's to Latin America, it's around the world right now, to Asia, Canada, Mexico. What's this going to do to our long-term growth and our medium-term growth when these economies are being disrupted as much as ours are right now?
Well, international trade and what a treasure we have. Jim Newsom, the Port of Charleston, what a remarkable success story that is. But then we have what's going on. To find out, just I saw in the paper today, a 96% reduction in air traffic through Charleston today. Who would ever imagine the same? I'm confident, sadly, across the state and across the country. And of course, that means much to us. It's called Boeing aircraft. And then Boeing itself has a ripple effect in the district I represent. Zeus Corporation of Orangeburg-Aiken provides the tubing. The cable is by Pirelli and Prysmian of Lexington. The interior is by AGY of Aiken. So over and over again, we have this. Now, one thing encouraging today is I was traveling along I-20 to Aiken today. There was an endless stream of trucks from Michelin with the extraordinary mining tires. And I credit Ambassador David Wilkins, who took me to Fort McMurray, Alberta, Canada, to see where tires made in Lexington, South Carolina are used on the mining equipment there. These are 20 feet tall tires. They're very nice, Jason, tires. They cost $60,000 each. But I did see truck after truck after truck. And then, hey, my favorite, and I worked with Governor Jim Edwards to help recruit that, but to be with Governor Carol Campbell and see BMWs, again, how important that is. I've had one of the most fun things I get to do in public service, whether it's in Beijing or Moscow or London, wherever I am in Sofia, Bulgaria, to see an X5. And I know exactly where it came from, Greer Spartanburg, South Carolina. And so we are so interconnected in a very positive way. And I'm just, any way that I can work with everyone who's on the program today and working with the Leadership Coalition to restore what we had just 60 days ago.
Great. We got a lot of questions lined up for you too, Congressman. I'm going to ask my last one right now on humanitarian values, the other pillar of this organization too. We talk about national security, economic, but there's no doubt that this crisis is just going to have an impact on the people of the developing world. Experts predict this pandemic to push more than 500 million people into poverty, put 250 million at risk of starvation. You've traveled around the world, seen firsthand how our foreign assistance can help combat hunger and poverty, places like Guatemala where you visited. And this is something that goes back to, your friend and South Carolina's friend, Ambassador David Beasley at the World Food Program right now, a great governor of your state back. This is about how important is it that for our values, our secular, our religious, our faith values as Americans right now to step up to the plate and mitigate this unprecedented humanitarian crisis. It's not just countries that are affecting this. They're people, they're women and children who are going to bear the brunt of this crisis right now and the other ancillary effects of it.
Well, indeed, I'm glad you pointed out, Governor Beasley, how fortunate we are with his service there in Rome to promote programs. And I had the opportunity to be with him in Guatemala City to see the World Food Program there through the Food for the Hungry program. Yeah. But gosh, the instability, these countries are so fragile, but the progress that was being made to provide for free market democracies in Central America. And sadly, this is all going to be at risk. The instability, the inability of functioning democratic governments to be replaced by persons who may promise everything for nothing. But the bottom line, I'm just confident that we'll be working together. And an example of that that y'all sent me that I am so happy about, and that is that many, many years ago, we had the plague of polio, but yet Jonas Salk, the vaccine was developed. Now polio has been reduced to just 3 countries, public, private. Give credit to Rotary International.
That's right.
And so I'm very, very grateful that polio now has been reduced to Afghanistan, to Pakistan, and to Nigeria. But something we learned from that, if it's in just 3 countries, the potential for expansion back to Western civilization is there. And so, and I actually, during this crisis, I've been wearing my Polio Plus shirt by Rotary International in Polio Now as a symbol of my belief that we can be successful. We have in the past, we will be now.
That's another story of hope there, which is great. You talked about Plan Colombia and other reasons, and here's the polio, both as a measure of progress that we can make, but also a reminder that until we stamp it out everywhere, it still can rebound to us back here. So great example from there. Yes. We've got a lot of questions from your constituents, which is great, who joined us today. Allison Love is a question, friend of ours, friend of yours too. I'm not sure she's going live or not, so let me read it and to you, and then she might join in, or you can answer to you as well. Question from Allison is about international students and visitors whenever it's appropriate. A really complex question right now. I mean, that is, our connection to the world isn't only about the goods and services we export, but one of our exports are our amazing higher institution learning right now. They export that by bringing students here. Clemson, you know so well, University of South Carolina, the Citadel. I mean, these are jewels of South Carolina's education assets, but also its economy. These are students that come here, they spend money in our universities and the surrounding communities, the add-on effect. But what are we going to be seeing with students coming for this fall and in the future, international students?
I share the concerns of Colonel Love, and we know the benefit of having international students around the world. You can travel, as I've had the opportunity to do, and I'm very humbled by the opportunity I've had, but to run into graduates of USC, Citadel, even Clemson. And so but because they love America, they love South Carolina. It's so important. They are diplomats on behalf of the free market democracies too. And so I'm just hopeful that with good people like Allison Love, that we can be working with the Department of Education, with the State Department, to make sure that the foreign student programs are reinstituted in the fall.
No question. I mean, there's something that's going to be really tricky, but it's so important to the economy and to the long-term health of those crown jewels. I got another question, I think, right now as well. Let me open this up. We have one from Deborah DePauli. Let me read it to you, sir, and you can answer. The coronavirus knows no borders, and the world's most vulnerable children are facing devastating consequences. People living in crowded refugee camps are at risk for spread of the virus, and food insecurities are expected to increase around the world. What will you do to address the unique needs, and as you and your fellow members of Congress and the President, the administration, the unique needs of refugees and other vulnerable children impacted by this pandemic?
Well, the good news, we have extraordinary people who are working with the refugee camps. I've visited with the Syrian refugees in Jordan. I've worked with the Turkish government, which has a significant number of Syrian refugees, and the people who are running these facilities are from the heart. They're not doing this because they're getting paid.
Yeah.
And so they will be proactive, and the level of refugee populations around the world. I'm just confident with USAID, with the State Department, that we will address that.
Jordan's such a key ally you mentioned there. Your work on armed services, Foreign Affairs Committee, they just do remarkable work for that region to take in those who are displaced in regions, to keep the entire region from exploding too in a lot of ways. And that work we can do with allies like there who can bear that burden, so important. And we're going to see it pushed even more in this crisis right now, unfortunately, in the weeks and months ahead. I have a question. I think someone going to live right now, that we have Ford Graham on the line who wants to ask a question to Congressman Wilson. Ford, why don't you go ahead and ask your question? We can hear you. Ford, go ahead if you can hear us.
Jason, I think we might need to move on to the next question.
Got it. Well, maybe we'll go back to Ford if we can, but let me get you another one here. Let's get to another question in our queue that we have. I have one from Sarah Sharman. What can the United States do to help strengthen the World Health Organization and other international agencies to put in place mechanisms to provide early warning systems and effective address pandemics? Congressman, you talked about the way we need to get also WHO working on the same page with us across the board, but we do need these force multipliers out there to help us address these things too, right? To get us the right information and to address that on the front lines out there.
And this is something that it'll be bipartisan, I'm confident. But we need to look into the World Health Organization. They were really parroting the disinformation that was being provided by the People's Republic of China all the way through February, not just in January or December, but even into February, as late as February 29th. They were providing false information, which is inconceivable, except that we're trying to cover up the lack of preparedness and the mistakes made in Wuhan. That's inexcusable. But I'm confident that this should be a bipartisan effort. And then, hey, we've already had the example of Governor Nikki Haley as a person who's asked for accountability. And so I'm looking forward to a joint effort with the Foreign Affairs Committee, House and Senate, and how fortunate we are with Lindsey Graham and Tim Scott. We've got people who are going to look into this, but the World Health Organization, I mean, it's appalling to me to see that they concealed and simply just parroted the false and disinformation from the People's Republic.
Right. I think we have, Congressman, I think Ford Graham, we have Ford's mic fixed this time. So
mic
Ford,
is working now.
All right, there we
I'm
go.
ready.
Good to have you.
Good to have you, Congressman. Thanks for joining us today. This is Ford down in Charleston with K&L Gates. As a former Peace Corps volunteer, I was obviously disappointed that Peace Corps recalled all of its volunteers from across the globe, understandably under the circumstances. But how do we ensure that the Peace Corps is fully funded and ready to go and ready to reestablish ties with all of these needy countries when essentially the go-ahead is given? How do we ensure that they're properly funded to move forward to be able to reestablish themselves across the globe?
Well, Ford, thank you for your Peace Corps service. I wasn't aware of that, but I'm really grateful that people from the Holy City can do good. And so I was disappointed actually, but it's understandable that we have called back all of our Peace Corps representatives. They have made such a difference everywhere on Earth. For real people at the local level. And so I know that I will be supporting every effort, bipartisan, to have the Peace Corps volunteers return as quickly as possible. and it needs to be safe for them. I understand that, gosh, and because we want no one injured. But it was so disappointing to me when I saw the phenomenal efforts that we had to go through to return these wonderful volunteers. And so I want them back, and any way forward that I can help promote that, I will.
Great example there, South Carolinians serving abroad in the Peace Corps. You deal with very high level diplomacy, sir, but you have your fellow citizens and constituents who are out there on this cultural, this person-to-person diplomacy about the best of American values abroad, or we talked about our universities too, about exposing American values and showing them, demonstrating them here. That part of the cultural diplomacy that we have, so invaluable, and again, being disrupted by this virus right now, that getting our universities back with international students as soon as we can safely, getting our Peace Corps volunteers back out into the field and doing that, that's going to do wonders for our diplomacy right now too. I think we have another question right now with our microphone, Dr. Jane Cahaley as well with a question. If you want to go ahead and ask a question to the Congressman.
Yes, thank you so much, Congressman. I appreciate this time. I serve as the Sister Cities International State Representative for South Carolina, and we have over 8 cities in South Carolina that are linked with 18 plus countries around the world. And we just appreciate your support and are very interested in this act that you are working on to strengthen local diplomacy at the city and state levels, and would like to know a little bit more about that and how we can be involved here in South Carolina.
Well, hey, Jane, thank you so much, because, hey, personally, our family has benefited so much. The Partners of the Americas program, we have hosted students from Colombia to go to high school and live with us unintentionally due to the instability in Colombia. Our host student was with us instead of 6 months, 3 years, but it was a wonderful opportunity. And so the Partners of the Americas are terrific. And then the sister city programs, working with former Mayor Bob Koble to go to Plovdiv, Bulgaria, ancient Tremontium, Philolopolis, who would ever imagine, and then to go to Chelyabinsk, Russia, to be a sister city. I'm so grateful that in Germany, over and over again, we have a sister state with Ross tonight, over and over again, that we can see the benefits of the sister city programs, and we need to get them fully back on track, and because it's so mutually beneficial to see the extraordinary cultures around the world, and then they have the opportunity to see American society.
Thank you for that question. We have even more, but we promised everyone an hour or so we don't want to take up too much of their time this afternoon. Maybe we can relay some of those questions back to you and your team, and we can get back to them too. But we've had a great conversation so far, and you've taken us around the world, literally, to your travels, experience, and work. A lot of hard things we talked about today and the challenges we're dealing with here and our fellow citizens around the world dealing with as well. So a lot of tough things, but you always gave us a number of measures of hope as well. So I want to end on a more positive part of this conversation in the midst of all these challenges we have with the pandemic. What gives you hope as we meet the rise of this challenge about stopping this virus, rebuilding our economy, providing hope to Americans in the world right now? What are some things that you are banking on hope as we look forward right now to a world beyond this pandemic?
Well, Jason, we can see it in the last 45 days. The pharmaceutical companies, people like Lou Kennedy of Nephron here in Casey, over and over again, the level of testing capability has improved beyond imagination, from 2 weeks to 5 minutes. And then in regard to vaccine, I'm very grateful for the relationship of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu with President Trump. They're working very closely to provide for vaccine development that could be in a record time that would have never been imagined before. So over and over again, and to see countries come to our aid, I so appreciate. One of the first calls I got was from the Taipei Consul General in Atlanta, offering assistance, which I relayed to Attorney General Alan Wilson, to Governor Henry McMaster, that the people of Taiwan wanted to come to the assistance of the United States. So over and over again, I've seen positive, but all of us working together, and it should be bipartisan, and I look forward to be bipartisan. And then if anybody has any inquiries or requests, please go to our website, joewilson.house.mail.gov, and we'd be happy to receive your information, any proposals you may have.
So thank you so much for your time today. Your constituents appreciate it. It's great catching up with you again too.
Thank you.
And they're fortunate to have you representing you in Congress.
Hey, I'm the fortunate one to represent South Carolina. Thank you, Jason.
We're grateful for your leadership on all these issues, and thank you for your time. Keep doing amazing work, and we will be in touch in the weeks ahead. I want to close out our program with my colleague Jeremy Tolbert, our Southeast Outreach Director, to close out our call today. Thank you all for joining. It was a pleasure to have this conversation. You had great questions for the Congressman, and we will be with you working side by side in the weeks and months ahead. Jeremy.
Thanks, Jason, for leading us in such an interesting and timely conversation. Appreciate it. And Congressman Wilson, great to see you again. Thanks again so much for your unwavering support for America's global leadership, especially at such a critical time. You've been a champion for a long time, and we really appreciate your work. Thanks to everyone who joined the call today, including our South Carolina Advisory Committee members, as well as the folks here with our Veterans for Smart Power program. USGLC is regularly updating everyone on what's happening in Washington, around the country, and around the world. You should have received a few updates from us this week. If not, please feel free to reach out to me afterwards. We'll continue to send a few more updates in the coming weeks. Also want to encourage everyone to reach out to Congressman Wilson or another member of the South Carolina delegation if you're outside of his district, just to share your positions on why it's so critical to keep America's global leadership around the world strong, especially at this time. As we've heard today, it's not just in our economic interests, it's a part of our national security and our humanitarian values as a country as well. So your voice really makes a difference here. For up-to-date information on USGLC, what's happening across the country and globe, I'd encourage everyone to follow us on Twitter and other social media. Join our upcoming virtual events. We've got several great calls coming up in the coming weeks, so really hope you're able to join us there. So thanks again for all of your support during these really challenging and difficult times. Look forward to seeing everyone again down in Columbia or across the state after when we're on the other side of COVID-19 and seeing everyone else in person. So again, thanks to all. Congressman, thank you much, and stay well. Take care.
And thank you. Hey, Jeremy and Jason, hey, USGLC is more important than ever with the tragedies that are occurring around the world. We hadn't heard about them yet, but country after country is being catastrophically affected and tragically affected, families at risk that have never been at risk before. And so that by working together, we can succeed.
Amen, sir. Thank you for your time as always.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody.